Hello, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, and my esteemed guest, Anastasiya Paraskevova.
Oh,
If I've pronounced that correctly, I don't know. Have I butchered it?
yeah, you butchered it pretty bad,
Oh,
but don't worry, it's
jeez.
fine. I'm very used to it by now.
Go on.
Like
So tell me
two
how
out
I
of
should be
10
pronouncing.
people.
How should I be pronouncing your name?
Well, it's like Anastasiya without z, so it's Anastasiya,
Yeah.
and the surname is very hard, so I'm not going to to try. But it's like Paraskevova, Paraskevova. Yeah, I know it's
It's
hard. Don't
exactly
try.
it's exactly what I said. I think you misheard me. I'm
No,
pretty
yeah,
sure it's what I said.
yeah, okay. That's what you all foreign people do. You will say like, "You butchered my name," and I will try to tell you, and you're like, "No, no, it's exactly what I said," and you're like, "No, it's not.
So
It's really not."
sadly
Mm.
enough, I've got a degree in languages, right? And
I see.
I never understood how I'd be in France saying something like, and they go, what? And you go, and they go, huh? You go, and you say, and they say, oh, and you go, that's
Yeah,
what
it's
I
not the
said.
same.
That's what I said. And then I was working in a bar
Yeah,
I was working in a
yeah,
bar
it's
once,
fun.
and a foreign
Yeah,
person came in and said, oh, can I have a banana or something like that? And I went, what? Banana? And I went, what? And I did this thing and I went, oh, banana. And it's like the
banana.
whole
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, it's just like how
yeah.
you pronounce these things is so important. Anyway, that's completely irrelevant to what we're going to be talking about. So,
Sure.
welcome. Really pleased to have you here. You are a native of Kharkiv, and I've
Yep.
probably butchered that. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and let them know a little bit about yourself, maybe your experiences of the war, kind of chronologically, a little bit, and we can talk about that as you go.
Yeah, we can definitely. So I'm from Ukraine, Kharkiv, which is Kharkiv is pretty close to the Russian border. It's like 40 kilometers, basically something like that, away from Russia. And we have been on basically the frontline city for quite some time. It also happens to be the biggest city in Ukraine after our capital, Kiev. So yeah, and it's east of Ukraine, and mostly where Russian speakers live, which I am. Yeah, so I am a Russian speaker, but I know Ukrainian too as well, obviously. But yeah, so I have been
Which is
have
a
not
really
like
interesting. Sorry, it's a really interesting point
yeah.
about being a Russian speaker. And we talked a little bit about this before we went live. Uh, are you okay to just dwell on that a little bit? So you're a Russian speaker. Have you seen a change in attitude towards people who speak Russian in Ukraine? And also, is it a myth that Ukraine is deeply anti-Russian language, like the Russian information machine says?
So basically, everything Russia says about prosecution of Russian speakers or I don't know, human rights violations or shit like that is all false. Like I have never been prosecuted or discriminated against as a Russian speaker in Ukraine. Pretty much not a single time in my entire life. And I have been in all parts of Ukraine, in the west, in center, in north and south, everywhere. And yeah, the map shows you, and the Kharkiv is pretty close. And it is obviously like an eastern part of Ukraine. So yeah, so this is entirely a myth. Nobody did anything to pretty much carve on my rights in any way, shape, or form. The only thing people like bring up is language laws, so-called, which have been basically promotion of Ukrainian language in Ukraine, which is, hardly a holocaust they painted to be, because it's just basically what happened is we started speaking Ukrainian more. Our officials had to speak Ukrainian and had to know Ukrainian, which is an insult to Russia in itself. Just people speaking Ukrainian in Ukraine. I have zero. I don't understand otherwise what is wrong with politicians in Ukraine speaking Ukrainian, our president, and other officials. Also, we had like official documentation has to be filled in Ukrainian, but that's about it. Like no prosecution of you actually speaking it. So you can speak whatever language you want. Nobody like prosecutes you. And just the official things should be in Ukrainian, which is the national language and has been since we gained independence in 1991. So it's not a should be a surprise why so many people speak Russian here, but I guess it's not because it's just the consequences of imperialism, of Russification, of prosecution of Ukrainian language for centuries, pretty much since Russian Empire and then in Soviet Union as well. And because of that, the part of the country speaks primarily Russian, but has nothing to do with our own personal choice. It has everything to do with Russian policies and prosecution of the language. So
Yeah, because
if
I
something
was
has been,
reading the
yeah,
Gates of Europe, the history of kind of Ukraine within Europe, and they was talking about trying to stamp out the Ukrainian language. I can't remember now. Was it before the First World War? I think there was a time when they were trying to wipe out the language then, and it's
yeah.
like history repeating itself.
Basically, what they mostly likely you learned about is laws called Valuev Circular and Emsky Ukaz. Those two laws were done in Russian Empire, and they prohibited Ukrainian language. So at first, it was prohibition of educational literature. So basically, teaching people Ukrainian in school stuff like that. And afterwards, it was about everything. So like novels, poetry, everything was prohibited basically. So the person who created this law in Russian Empire, Valuev, which his name is, in the name of the law, and he basically said that Ukrainian language did not exist, it doesn't exist, and it wouldn't exist. So this is something you can hear pretty much modern day Russia say. So they have forgot to involve, I guess. Yeah,
This is an
and
interesting way of doing liberation. The whole claim that, and I know we've interrupted, we've gone off on a tangent for you starting to sort of introduce what your history is, but this is really important. Like the idea that Russia going in and liberating Ukraine while at the same time digging trenches, building all, destroying towns, stopping people, pulling out books from libraries and all these kind of different
yeah,
things
yeah.
that are just not what liberation is. The word liberation is about freedom, and you're saying no, you can't have the freedom to speak what you want, to think what you want, and to identify as who you want.
Yeah, for them it's just basically them like defending Russian speakers or ethnic Russian or Russian population in other countries. For them has been always been a trick for them to excuse their imperialist expansion. They did it in Georgia. They did it in Moldova. They did it in Ukraine. So it's not like exactly like new, basically, is what I'm saying. They would even they would always use this as discrimination of like Russian speakers or Russians, that no organization, reputable organization like of Human Rights Watch or something like that, then can find any discrimination of those like groups, but they will claim it and they would use it as an excuse to basically invade, which is pretty interesting because they themselves installed this Russian language in those areas. So they made people physically, like forcefully made them speak this language and to abandon their own language. But then they will claim that they're defending those people that they made speak this language. So it's a very useful tool for them. Same thing with deporting a lot of people, native people, to Siberia, to Kazakhstan, to whatever, and do mass deportations of Ukrainians, Georgians, whatever, and then they will replace them with Russian population, and then they will say, oh, there's ethnic Russians living there, we must defend them. It's a very useful tool that they as an empire have been using for quite some time. So it's not like a particularly new trick, I would say. Yeah,
Yeah.
and if anything had been prosecuted and discriminated in east of Ukraine and south as well, is Ukrainian. So it's not Russian, and has never been. So yeah, the only thing I can say is that now after this invasion, all-out invasion in February, the attitudes of some people towards Russian language has become more hostile. But this is a direct consequence of this invasion, and it's Russian own doing. it's Russia's fault that this happened, because before this invasion, this was not a thing. But after it, some people do feel like Ukrainian speaking Russian is not right, and we should avoid it, and we should speak Ukrainian and distance ourselves as far as possible from Russia. So it
So
is an
much
attitude you can.
yeah. There's so much I want to talk about with regard to that, and attitudes towards Russia, and your attitudes to Russia, especially given your very personal experience over the war. But I guess we need to speak about that personal experience. So what I interrupted you, and I'm sorry, but where were you in terms of? So we got as far as you speak Russian, and then we've gone off on one. So
Yeah,
what was
it's
your
no problem.
story through the war then?
Well, basically, what happened is my city was bombed in 5 in the morning, and when this happened, we were woken up by explosions. Basically, me and my family, and since then, I pretty much was scared that they're going to occupy my city for like 2 or 3 days, basically. But then we realized that we are not only kicking their ass, but there's like literally no chance of them taking Kharkiv, because most of our territorial defenses managed to, literally, people who are not soldiers before, who just territorial defense is like a unique, I guess, structure in Ukraine. This is civilians who took arms to protect their respective cities, areas, regions, and they managed to not only to defend Kharkiv, but pretty much defend almost all major cities apart from Mariupol and Kherson. Uh, Everything else was like villages, little towns, but no major
I
like
guess
cities were.
Melitopol as well. I suppose you could throw into that, but yeah, incredibly
Yeah,
successful defense.
yeah, pretty much. But they leveled that city, to just to take it. Mariupol, I mean, there's like nothing
Yeah,
left of it, and yeah, so there's that. And other than that, like we have been successful, and I remember pretty much very clearly like this conversation I had on, I think, on the second day or something like that, with my best friend who enlisted, and I called him. He's from Donbass, by the way, so he escaped in 2014 and started living in Kharkiv. But yeah, so I called him and I was like, so what are we gonna do, like, with this whole invasion situation? And he was like, I'm sorry, can I swear or not?
yeah. Go for it.
Okay, so he was like, what the fuck else can we do? I'm going to enlist. And I was like, oh. And he was like, yeah, I'm like literally in the line right now. And he showed me pictures of lines of people, lines, like kilometers basically of people enlisting on the second, first, and third day. And then I was sure that people are willing to, defend this country no matter what and not give up. So this is something gave me, I guess, surety that we're not going to just, lose, as many people predicted in the West and everywhere else. So yeah, so he enlisted, and I decided to do what I can basically do, which is being a volunteer, assisting the army, assisting the local people who we have pretty much zero food for 2 weeks in Kharkiv. So it was very hard for some people, especially elderly, to get water, to get food, and this is what something that we were, trying to help them with and stuff like that. And my own family also had like several, issues of my parents were, especially my mother, was having a hard time enduring those like shellings that were just constant, like not ending explosions like all over the town. And because of that, we temporarily moved to Poltava, which is quite close to Kharkiv, but like a 2 hour like away from Kharkiv, another city. So we stayed there for some time, but I was constantly moving between like Kharkiv and Poltava, and yeah, it's like there a little bit, a little city. So yeah, we moved there basically, stayed there for a bit, and the situation there was not as horrible as it was in Kharkiv. It was not pretty much not shelled or bombed whatsoever, Poltava. And yeah,
When you
so
hear
then
when
we
you hear
returned.
the when you hear like, explosions hitting Kharkiv or anywhere, like dogs fireworks night, they often it completely screws them up. We have fireworks night on the 5th of November in the UK,
Mm.
and my parents have got a dog, and it just cowers on that night, and the sound of those. Does it affect you, the sound of explosions? Are you is this something that's quite haunting, or you just got used to it? Is it normalized?
By now I got used to it. It's been a year,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so by
yeah,
now I'm pretty used to it. Yeah, it's not like something I react that much. But in the beginning, for sure, it was very terrifying, of course. And yeah, so also there's like different, of course, proximity to it. Like some people have experienced it way worse than others, and just for your, viewers and stuff, my father was killed by artillery, by Russian Smerch, and in his house in Kharkiv. And so it was pretty close, let's put it like that. It is, of course, is terrifying. And when it's close, it still is very scary. And my mother survived that. But my father did not. He was killed almost instantly, like I believe, on the balcony, because most of the impact was on him. And yeah, so when it's pretty close, I get like maybe like, a bit like spooked, obviously. But if it's like somewhere like far away, then mostly don't care that much at this point. But a reasonable thing to do is go hide, obviously, like somewhere
yeah.
in the corridor, or maybe in like between two walls, or like somewhere where you're far away from the windows. But when you live in a city that is so close to front line and gets constantly like shelled, bombed, if you're going to hide like every single time there are air raid sirens are on, you're just will not able to live your life. You would be just in
These
a
risks
corridor
that you
most of
take
your life.
that's that normalization. You suddenly start taking you calculated risks, I guess. I wanted to ask you about the sad loss of your father, and
Mhm.
whether that, if I may, whether that's had, or whether you think it will have going forward, a really strong psychological effect on you with regard to your attitudes towards Russia and Russians. Do you think that is that a powerful emotional kind of component of how you feel?
It's a great question, actually. Nobody
Oh,
asked me
thanks.
that, but it's just I think it might sound a little bit strange, and people might not believe me, I guess, but I really don't think so. I mean, sure, I um it is quite quite painful, for me, for my
Mm,
family, obviously. But
mm,
it's just the way I see it is just might sound harsh to people who are not in a war zone, but my father was just one of many. So plenty of families. Even that day, there was like 30 people were killed in Kharkivska Oblast, in like Kharkiv area. The day my
mm.
father died, which was in 11 July. So I understand that for me personally, of course, it hurts more because it is my father, But it was, I guess. But it's just it's something that so many people felt here, especially in the east, where the shelling was, and the missile strikes were the worst. So almost every person I know has someone, at least a friend, a relative, an acquaintance, someone, co-worker, maybe someone that have been killed or injured or maimed seriously by this whole thing. So it's not like exclusive to me and my family. So yes, of course, I am mad, angry, but I think it wouldn't like change my attitudes that much if it
In a
didn't
sense,
happen, because
in this, well, sorry, carry on.
yeah, I mean, like before it happened, right, in July, I don't think I can like hate them more, because I don't think it's possible, to be honest with you. So
Right, okay,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
interesting.
So
Yeah,
I don't think it is
it's
up
really terrible what's happened,
the
but there is no
yeah.
capacity left for hating them more. Well, so that leads me on to another question, which is: do you differentiate Russia from the Russians, and the Kremlin for the Russians? Do you have any empathy or sympathy at all for the Russian population, or when you see Russia? And soldiers and anyone to do with the nation of Russia, do you put them all in one big pot?
This is going to be a very honest answer, and
Yeah,
not politically correct one, but yes, I do in general.
yeah,
So, not in the exact same like I say, it would be stupid to place exact amount of blame on Kremlin or Putin and some random Russian. Of course,
yeah.
it's not the exact same amount of blame, obviously, and they're like miles, kilometers apart. The levels of blame I place
But
on
your kind of
soldiers who commit
reaction
war.
to them, I
Yeah.
guess.
So the yeah the so the I guess the soldiers who in particular commit war crimes in Ukraine almost every day is a completely different thing than just, of course, like some random Ivan that lives somewhere in Russia. And, but at the same time, to say they're completely blameless is wrong, because not only majority of Russians support this war, this invasion and genocide of Ukrainian people, not only the majority of Russia supports the president and the war itself, they also had those incredibly chauvinistic, honestly disgusting attitudes towards Ukraine and Ukrainians for decades, if not centuries. So it's not something new. It's just reached its peak, I guess, is what happened.
This is
So
where I
yeah,
start getting really philosophical in my thoughts and going, we can start explaining how these guys act like this because of the disinformation, because of the propaganda that's been fed to them for decades upon decades. And of course, explaining how people are acting is not the same as justifying them acting in that way. But
yeah. Also, there are certainly groups of people in Russia that are not for this war, and they're very much against it. It's a small minority, but it does exist, obviously. I
yeah,
feel for them, especially because I feel like they feel like my uncle, for example, who lives in Russia, he feels very hopeless, very powerless, useless to change anything. And he is a good person. He supports Ukraine, but there's nothing he can do pretty much. And yeah, of course, I feel for them, for the people like that. Also, there are people who are just, I guess, they're just complicit. They're not exactly supportive, but they are either afraid or don't care, which this is something I tell to quite a lot of people, which basically I have like a bunch of relatives in Russia. Like most of my family lives in Russia and has been. And quite a lot of them are exactly like that. They're complicit and they are very apathetic. And the worst thing is they don't hate us, they just don't give a shit. They don't care. So this is not exactly great to hear, but it's just the reality of it. They just don't care.
really interesting.
Yeah,
So, do
about
you think this? Yeah, do you think it's a case of burying your head in the sand? So, if you compartmentalize these things, then you don't have to deal with them, and then you protect yourself. So, if you're a Russian and you're going, right, this war is terrible, then you have to admit that your whole government is terrible. Then you have to admit that there's no way that you can change that because the democratic institutions are broken, and then you feel powerless, and so you start this kind of tumbling
Yeah.
boulders of just so the easiest thing to do is just like, right, I'm just not going to think about that, and I'm just, because I can't, because of it opens Pandora's box, and that means that they have less sympathy for you just because you're not in the picture. Would that be fair?
Yes, you're pretty correct. I guess it will, I guess, this apply to quite a lot of people for sure there. And not only that, you have to understand that for them it's not only crumbles their like reality, but history itself. So if they have to rethink so much of Russian actions, of Russian imperialist policies, of Soviet Union, how Russia treated the rest of the post-Soviet Union, countries, genocides, everything they did, they have not come to terms with any of that. They do not accept those actions as bad ones. So for them, it will have to rethink like the entirety of their self-perception. If they admit now what they're doing is entirely and horribly wrong, then they will have to rethink quite a lot of stuff. Not only just this recent history, but quite a lot old history as well.
Well,
And they
breaking
build
up there a little
themselves
bit.
at. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Sorry, no, I think, yeah, it's fine. I think it might be internet my end. As I was saying to you earlier, we've had terrible internet in
Oh,
half of the
yeah.
UK today. So, but yeah,
It's
carry on.
kind of funny that I have a better internet in Warzone than
Yeah,
you
I know.
do.
Jeez.
Yeah, but
Don't
that's
get me
just,
started.
anyhow, but this is just something to keep in mind that for them it's like a complex of various issues. It's not just one thing. So yeah, so they have not come to terms with their past and with their actions. For example, most of Russians still would not accept Pact Molotova-Ribbentrop, which is something they did in World War II when Stalin basically in Soviets invaded Poland alongside with Hitler, basically made a pact with him, right? So this is something you would pretty much never hear in Russia. So they themselves envisioned themselves as always the saviors, always the good guys, always the the protectors. So everyone who hates them or dislikes them is just either jealous of their glorious, achievements, or are just betrayers, traitors. Traitor nations is what they call quite a lot of people, including Ukrainians. So for them it's quite hard. This has to be like a foundational change. But it's not going to happen easily. But I do think that them losing this war might actually be beneficial for them in that regard, in rethinking things, and maybe becoming less of a fascist,
Well,
country would be nice.
yeah. So it's really, really interesting. There's so much to talk about there. I mean, I'm really interested in like how countries become fascist. Jason Stanley's "How Fascism Works" is a really good book to understand that. And it looks like Putin's done every single one of the 10 pillars of what you need to do to become a fascist
Yeah.
state. But one thing that I heard a commentator talk, well, a good long time ago now, actually within the last year though, was how when Germany has come to terms with Nazi Germany and the Second World War, and it's done this whole process of, and there's a big long German word for this whole process of coming to terms with that and owning up to it, and then it's in the public sphere, and it's talked about, and education changes and all that kind of stuff. Whereas the USSR, or Russia in its present iteration, hasn't done that. It hasn't come to terms with all the horrors that have taken place in the Soviet era. And so when it's coming to this Russian Federation with Putin in charge, there's still no understanding. There's still this mythic past that's a perfect past. Whereas whereas Germans would never say they've got this mythic past. It's like, make Germany great again. Well, actually, it was pretty damn dodgy back in the 1940s. So Russia's never gone through that process, and it still exists in this eternal mythic scenario.
Yeah. And not to mention that they also how some people, I forgot the person, unfortunately, but the quote is great, that the Soviet Union might have been not the bloodiest of regimes, but it was the most filled with lies, which is definitely, I think, true, because the bloody part is debatable, but maybe the person did not know the extent. But that's another story. But it's just the lies is very prominent thing. So their whole foundational like world view of the modern day Russian person is built upon entirely lies, mostly. Also, not only that, but they also, not to shift the blame, entirely. Propaganda is one thing, but it was much easier to be a Nazi in 40s, than it is to be a fascist now, because I think because it is, they have internet. They're not North Korea, so they have access to TV, to internet that is not Russian. They have access to our Telegram channels, Ukrainian ones. They have been on them for quite some time. We speak the same language as them in eastern parts of Ukraine, with mostly Russian speakers, as I said. So communication is not a problem. We have relatives, we have friends. All of us, most of us have Eastern. You can have someone they know who live in Russia. So it's not that hard to actually find out what is going on. And quite a lot of them do know what is going on. They're just okay with it or celebrate it, because they are themselves in on this game. It's not only Putin who has those like imperialist expansion fantasies. It's also Russians themselves. That's why they're so obsessed with the glorious days of the past. They celebrate the past all the time, not the present, not the future. They celebrate the days when they had geopolitical power more than they do now, when they had this like might, this military might, obsession with everything military, with everything is like, oh, about the army, about the power, the power. They talk about power all the time. This is something they miss, I guess, as a nation. And they, despite anything they might say about like equality in Soviet Union, everyone and their mama knows that nobody was fucking equal. Everyone knows that Russia was at the peak, at the food chain at the top, and everyone else was subservient. And so I guess the nostalgia for those days is something that quite a lot of Russians feel, and they sometimes are very open about it, very like explicitly say that Ukraine must be part of Russia or it will not exist. So either we will like basically kill you and subjugate and destroy you, or you become part of us. So you basically assimilate and become part of us. Yeah.
Julia Davis, a Russian media monitor, does such a good job of translating the propagandist Solovyov
Yeah, good
and
channel. Yeah.
Simonyan and all of these deeply horrible people that are
Yeah, those
expounding
are
these
interesting.
lies. Yeah, just but it is about eradicating the identity, the very existence of Ukraine, and talking about it in really openly genocidal terms.
Yeah.
It's
My
pretty
favorite guy
pretty.
is Solovyov. He's like
Yeah,
my favorite buddy because he's just. I think he just kind of like, and all of them suck, obviously, but Solovyov, he's just exemplifies this very, how should I say it, like fascist feel
yeah,
because of the theatrics, you know? It's like a performance every time. He's
yeah.
like doing an exorcism every time he speaks.
Well,
And
it's
it's
really funny you
very,
should use that
yeah,
language of exorcism because actually he started to get really religious in his rhetoric, and he's starting to see
yes,
this as a holy war and
yes, yes.
dressing up the whole.
We are the unclean ones, and
Yeah,
the unclean Ukrainians need to be only can be like cleansed with holy fire, you know, the language like that, which does sound kind of weird in 21st century. But this is just, I guess, the theatrics. The fascists just do love their theatrics. They have like this very like life or death, global threatening, you know, feel like the world is falling apart. We are the last saviors of, I don't know, like traditional values or some shit. You know, it's just it's
but
very
it's
something
really
like that. Yeah.
interesting. It's really interesting you catch it like that because I think there's a really strong tendency for governments like that to be reactive governments. As in
Yeah, for sure.
it's all about how terrible things are there, and we are fighting against the terribleness there, rather than building
Hmm.
up something positive. We are standing for something. It's a very negative
Against
way of
something.
doing
Yeah.
politics. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're always against something rather than for something, and
Yeah,
I
you can
think that.
ask them even. Sometimes it's very like kind of interesting if you talk with like stupid Russians, you know, and you will I'm also and you will talk with them and you will ask them like, what are you why are you doing this? Like, what is it for? Like the goal of it, and they
Yeah.
will tell you things that are against, not things that are for. So like
Yes,
Western
that's what I mean.
degeneracy,
Yeah,
I don't know, excuse me, it's it's offensive, but that's what they say. So yeah, so this is like
yeah.
something like that. I don't know, the gays, I don't know, like emancipation of women, something like that, right? So they would tell you about like Western degeneracy pretty much is how they view like I guess you could say the broad West like culture. So yeah, some would go as far as to say like democracy is part of Western degeneracy, which give me that Western degeneracy, you know, any day of the week. But yeah, for them it's always against something, the great enemy of sorts, and yeah, so they include us. So if it's religious talk, it would be like Satanism, like moral degradation. So you would see Solovyov literally call like Zelensky, our president, or like Ukrainians in general, like Satanists and shit like that. So he would basically like at the same time call us like I don't know, like Western degenerates, like we want to be part of like a Western sphere, but also we're like Satanists, we're like against God, against something like that. So it's very grandiose and it's very like life or death, like kind of situation. So yeah,
I'm listening, and I spoke to you about this before we went live, but I'm listening to Timothy Snyder, who's a Eastern European historian,
champ.
or sorry, a
Is a
historian
champ.
of Eastern Europe, and it's fantastic. So his book, he did a political pamphlet called On Tyranny, which is really, really short. Don't get them, or get that, but get the latest version as an audiobook, which is that plus on Ukraine. And the second part is much longer, and it's not really him reading a book, it's actually him just chatting about all these ideas, and it's absolutely fascinating. And one of the things he was talking about is how Russia looked to Ukraine as having democracy, so they've got a way of having succession,
Mhm.
which means that you've got Zelensky was voted in, right, and then he's putting things in place
Hey,
so that someone can take over. And when you have an exchange, you have a succession where a new government comes in and they come in and there's no problem and it's peaceful, and that's awesome. And Russia, that's a real threat to Russia. And
yeah,
the interesting thing he said is that Russia have never had that. They've literally never had that
yes,
kind
exactly, yeah.
of exchange of power in that way. It's yeah, and I thought, goodness, that's
So
obvious, but yeah,
yeah, if you Google like presidents in Ukraine, we have like a different one, you know, every time. It's never been like one tyrant who's just sitting there, you know, how it is in Belarus and in Russia, obviously. So for us, yeah, sure, our democracy is flawed and has been in many ways, but it's not anywhere near as authoritarian as it is in Russia, obviously. So our previous president Poroshenko was voted, and so was Zelensky. And yeah, we have been making strides, at least, to, I guess, be a something that the Western world can, I guess, accept as in European Union as a country worth being part of, like, a European Union. So it is human rights, it's democracy, it's proper functioning institutions, less corruption is a big thing, obviously, and those are things far away from Russia and closer to the to our Western neighbors. So this is something we have been trying to achieve for a while, and this is something that Russia not only doesn't want us to achieve, but actually can't allow us to achieve, because for them, we're extension of themselves. So we are not really like a nation, a separate people, a separate country. They see us as basically their fucking backyard, you know?
Yeah, I mean, going
So
back to
for
what
them,
the propagandists were saying, they see you as like deluded Russians.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
just Russians
yeah,
with an identity crisis. And they often talk about, just like transgender people have got some kind of delusion about who they're, and they literally use that as a parallel. And it's just
yeah,
like
cringe.
transgender people don't understand their own identity, so the Ukrainians don't understand that they are truly Russians. And it's like, yeah, how
Yeah,
about
yeah.
giving them
So
self-determination?
they would be basically like saying things like being Ukrainian is a disease of the mind, or like illness, I guess, of the mind. And it's like, you know, a language. Oh, hello, that's
Mm.
my friend. Yeah,
Oh,
yes, yeah, that's from my Twitter. Um, yeah,
so,
exactly. How they say the Ukraine instead of saying Ukraine. Yeah, he's
yeah.
pretty much correct. So basically, in Russian language, it would be they will purposefully say na Ukraiне instead of в Украине. So in Russian language, you use в when you speak about countries. So в Франции, in France, right? Yeah. So if you want to speak about a territory, so an island, like something that is not a country, like is a terrain, then you will say na. So they
Mm,
specifically, even in there, they use the word that is to say that we are not a country, but a province, like a territory,
mm,
So the English equivalent of that is the Ukraine instead of saying Ukraine. So you would not say the France, right? You would not say
yeah.
like the Italy, the Spain. You would say just Spain, Italy, France.
So
Same thing with
interestingly,
Ukraine. Yeah.
that it was the thing in English that we would say the Ukraine, and likewise the Crimea, as you know, because of this accident. Well, not accident, because of historically, Ukraine was seen as part of
Yeah,
the
but
Soviet Union.
saying the
So
saying the Crimea is correct because it is an
yeah,
island,
yeah,
and also
yeah,
it is part. It's just it's a region. It is a
yeah,
province, part of the
yeah,
bigger thing. But you won't say, and yeah, so it just little things like that, like little subtle things like that, and not subtle things like that. Like disease of the mind is not very subtle, I would say. Yeah, so so yeah, this is just something they have done again, not recently. It's a continuation of already existing policies that just escalated. So
yeah,
yeah, so this has, like I said, this guy Valuyev, it was, if I'm not mistaken, 19th century. So
yeah,
it's an existent policy for quite some time now.
yeah,
So yeah, it just gets worse, gets better, gets worse, get better. Depends on like the state of things, I guess. And Ukrainian resistance movements have fought against that for centuries. They just tend to kill them all, the people who
yeah,
doing the resistance movement. So like executed Renaissance is the pretty famous in Ukraine thing this was basically poets, artists, activists, Ukrainian ones who all have been executed for trying to basically just revive Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian language. So this is something that they generally do. I sometimes say to people like Ukraine is like kind of like a phoenix bird. So we just resurrect every now and then. So there are like resistance movements, Russians, or just annihilate them at some point, and then 50 years people are just terrified, don't want to do anything, like accept any shitty treatment we're given, just let us live. And then in 50 years people will be like, you know what, we actually are Ukraine, and we want to be independent, and we have our language, our own legacy, our own culture, our own
Mm.
heroes, and people will get annihilated again, and then 50 years of silence, and then they rise up again. The only hope I have is this time will be the last one. That this
Yeah.
time around we will manage to, to prevail.
Well, yeah, absolutely, 100%. On a related note, I loved it. I think it was when Kuleba gave a speech to the United Nations, and in the transcription of that speech, every single time he used the word Russia and Russians, it was in lowercase r. And Moscow as well, I think, a lowercase m, and it was just perfect. It's just you read this and
Yeah,
you've
lovely.
been
Yeah.
reading it for a bit, and then you're like, oh, I think they made a typo there. Oh no, they haven't. This is on purpose, and that is like just
Yeah.
a beautiful bit of trolling. I loved it.
Yeah, just
So
give them the taste of their own,
yeah,
medicine sometimes. Yeah,
so
they're
we
pretty content with disrespecting people. So, I guess
yeah,
disrespecting them back is not that big a deal at this moment.
yeah, quite. So going back to your experience of the war, we still only sort of touched on that. So we had you moved to Poltava. Are you back in Kharkiv now? And what's your sort of
Yes.
volunteering work? What's your experience of the war subsequently, and what is it presently? How's it changed?
So basically, I have returned to Kharkiv for some time. I have lived in Kiev for a little bit, but then I was like moving from Kiev to Kharkiv, from Kiev to Kharkiv, just got tiring, and I decided to entirely return to, to my home city, Kharkiv, to basically just be home. I just want to be home. But also, it's quite close to the front lines, so it's much quicker for me to get to the front lines from Kharkiv than it is from like Poltava or Kiev, for example. So
For what
basically,
reason?
can you say it again?
For what reason are you going to the front lines then?
Uh, to provide aid to our soldiers. So me and my volunteer bodies generally bring them quite a lot of stuff, mostly like medical supplies, scopes, drones, like a lot of stuff, like protective gear, quite a lot of things. Which all of it is on my Twitter, and you can see what I'm doing there. And also there's a link to my PayPal there, which is a donation link that you can, if you all of you who's watching, can help out a bit with that if you want. So this is basically
Yes.
what I do.
So
Yeah, in
yeah,
my
here it
bio
is,
there.
and that is that's gmail.com is your PayPal uh,
Yeah, exactly.
email
Yeah.
address. So if and I was going to say if anyone does, I don't know if anyone will super chat or anything, but certainly 50% of the proceeds to that will go to Anastasiya. Um,
Oh, not bad.
Not bad, thank you. We'll
Not
go
bad. Yeah.
to the work that she does, and then she posts up here when she gives the things. At the moment, you're raising money for a quad bike. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So you can list it. You closed it,
Oh,
but there's
sorry.
like
Yeah,
a tweet about it just below the stupid ones. Yeah, there's below. Forget that. Just list. Embarrassed. Uh, yeah. So again, it's me shading on Tatarsky. Yeah, it's just low below. Yeah. A bit. Oh, yeah, that's exactly it. So there's
yeah.
basically the post for the guys in Bakhmut. We're getting aid for them, and the aid we want to give them is a quad bike. What they do is basically they take body parts and bodies of our fallen soldiers back to back to Ukraine, back home, and back to their cities and families. And we don't leave our own, unlike certain Russians. So it's a gruesome job, but these guys are doing it. They have been doing it for months. Bakhmut is pretty much a bloodbath. There's quite a lot of fallen soldiers there. So yeah, so we wanted to find a quad bike for them and buy it and just give it to them so they can cross those very difficult terrains. The city of Bakhmut is pretty much ruins now, so it's very quite hard to get to places and to just do their job, which is yeah something we try to help them out. I post on my Twitter pretty much most of the things we buy and do, so if anyone's interested you can definitely go see. I started this volunteer thing after my appearance on CNN, which is interesting. But basically what happened is my sister, my cousin, she works with journalists as a fixer. So she like takes them places, translates for them, which is something I'm doing occasionally as well, by the way, but that's another story. So she then in the beginning of the invasion in February, basically, she asked me, "Do you want to work with ITV journal, ITV news? ITV news is a British, as you probably know, British news." And I was like, "Well, I never done anything like that. I'm not a professional, or I don't really have any social media or anything like that." And she was like, "Well, English, you live in Kharkiv, that would be quite enough for them." And I was like, "Oh, okay then." And I started working with them. So we did a bunch of videos with them about my life, video diaries in Kharkiv and stuff like that. And thanks to ITV News, then I was invited to CNN. I think 5 or 6 times. I spoke with Anderson Cooper and
Right.
Wolf Blitzer. Yeah, I
Wolf
think that's
Blitzer,
his name.
yeah, classic.
Yeah. So that's basically what happened. And after that, quite a lot of people tried to find me on Facebook that I was not using. I had Facebook, but I was not into that. And they were like, "Oh, are you the girl we saw on CNN?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's me." And like that, I started to gather in a little bit of a following, and decided to use it to get donations and start my volunteer work, which was very small at the time. It was mostly medical aid, so hemostatic dressings, blood stopping, different things that to help soldiers out. But after that, I also managed to get friendly with some YouTubers who I became a fixer for in Ukraine, and streamers and people like that who talk politics and covered Ukraine a bit. So yeah, so I gathered quite a big audience in Twitter, and since then, mostly, I have been much more successful in getting money for my volunteer work than I was before that, for sure. So thanks to all the peeps who constantly helped me. But yeah, even got a gratitude letter actually for my volunteer work, which is pretty cool. I
Oh,
can
brilliant.
actually
What from? Yeah. What from the
think I
guys
can
that
show you.
you've provided for?
Yeah, yeah.
Have you
It's
have
in
you ever thought?
Ukrainian, so you know.
Have you ever thought
Uh,
about? Were you ever tempted to join
yeah,
up
here
yourself?
it is.
Oh
The
wow.
army, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's official gratitude list. Pretty cool, pretty nice. Podяка is gratitude in Ukrainian. Yeah, so
Oh,
that's pretty
congratulations.
cool.
But
Thank
yeah.
you.
Have you ever considered
Yeah.
joining up yourself?
Not really, because first of all, I'm quite useless when it comes to killing people. So I think
Well, have
that's
you
not my
tried?
jam.
Goodness.
Yeah, not really, but I don't think I'd be good at it. Let's put it like that. So
Yeah.
I have zero training, zero. Sorry, I'm trying to install my lights back. Yeah, I have zero training in any of that, and yeah, so I don't think I could be good or useful in that. And what I am useful at is being a volunteer, providing insane amounts of aid to the guys, and also being sort of like a spokesperson, I guess, at this point you could say, because I know English and I can talk with journalists, talk with people such as yourself interested in the what is going on. And I think that's kind of my mission, and is something I'm more useful to than just being a
Do
useless
you,
soldier.
well,
A
do you, I
soldier
mean,
that is very bad
yeah, but
at
do
doing
you
its
feel
job.
that
Yeah.
this has really given you a sense of purpose?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, of course.
Like in a way
I
that
like
you maybe wouldn't have had, in a way that you maybe wouldn't have had in a normal job in outside of wartime, that you'd be maybe uh, the daily drudgery of working life, but now in this very different cauldron that is a war going on in your country, that you have this really I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but do you get this
Mhm.
strong sense of purpose?
For sure, yeah. I think it's for many people in Ukraine who are doing their best to civilians who are also volunteering or just giving some kind of money to funds and to help our army. That most people are invested in some kind of way, some more than others, obviously, right? But I quite enjoyed my chill life before that. Not gonna lie, I would prefer it to war for sure. But I was a revolutionary back in the day in 2014. Uh, yeah, I guess. Thank you. Yeah, but it's just I'm not saying that soldiers who are killing people, so to speak, who are killing invaders, liberating cities, and they are way bigger heroes than I ever could be, because they're literally risking their lives at the front lines every day. So this is something I would like to point out, that I'm not like saying that they're doing something bad or wrong. Of course not. But yeah, but I do think that volunteer effort in Ukraine has been exceptionally important to our victories, to our support of the army, and volunteers are doing uh, just tremendous, just immensely important job in Ukraine. And this whole our victories is a united effort. So there's like soldiers on the front, and there's like this backbone of the war, which is volunteers, and civilians who continue to go to work, who continue to support the economy, who continue to try and do everything they can to assist this effort of us defending ourselves. So I do think that all of us together is why we are going to win. So yeah, all of us working together. And I was a revolutionary in 2014 and in
Can
Maidan
I just
Revolution.
before? Yeah, I really want to listen to you talk about that. I just want to say thank you so much to Cheryl Watley and also to Julia Dacre. It's really, really generous, and
Thank
hopefully that
you.
will also benefit my guest as well. So really great. Thank you for your support. But yeah, tell us
Super
about
appreciate it. Thank you.
tell us about your experiences in 2014 then, and but well. I was wondering whether you could also answer this question. So often you hear from pro-Russian voices, and I have a lot of Russian trolls on my YouTube videos. So
They're
I,
everywhere. Don't worry.
I must
Yeah.
have reached some kind of tipping point where they're like all piling in. But one of the things you hear so often is, it's NATO's fault for expansion, or it's the US's fault for getting involved, and Euromaidan was all about the Newland and McCain and these
Yeah, I know.
Americans and all this kind of stuff. How
Yeah.
would you answer that? How would you put that to
Well,
bed? And also, what were your experiences up to, and who were you at that time, and with Euromaidan?
Well, to put it like in a simple terms, it's a load of shit, all of that, because it's just completely not true. NATO is just an excuse, like saving Russian people from discrimination. Same stuff with NATO. Russia already does have countries, borders countries who are in NATO. It's nothing new. Nobody was going to attack Russia. NATO has not been an offensive force in many, many years. So it's just completely the only reason why countries in this part of the world want to join NATO is not because we're such huge fans of NATO. It's because we're afraid of Russia, of Russian expansion, of Russian invasion, genocidal wars they did before 2014. So yeah, so it's complete and utter.
Sorry to interrupt, but it is no coincidence that as soon as countries like Poland come out of the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union, that they run straight to NATO.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that has to tell you something. Oh, my mate Aaron Adair, holy cow! I've just authored a book with Aaron Adair,
Whoa,
and
50. That's a lot. Sorry,
that's hugely generous.
Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank
He's
you.
an absolute legend. In fact, I think it was Aaron that sent me your Twitter handle and said you should
Oh,
try and interview
cute.
her. So,
Thank you, Aaron.
thank you, Aaron. He's
Appreciate
a
you a lot.
super awesome human being. But yeah, sorry, carry on. So, Euromaidan.
Yeah, so like I said, NATO is just another excuse. The countries like Baltics, who are like escaped Russia basically by joining like NATO in a way, because they want some protection, some guarantees that Russia would not pull its usual shit. Countries like Finland, who have been attacked in Soviet times, the war on basically the entire this giant Soviet Union entity basically attacked Finland. Yeah, also using the excuse, by the way, of not allowing like NATO expansion and stuff like that. So yeah, so it's just something they regularly do. Nobody is attacking Russia. Nobody was going to. It makes zero sense. And when it comes to Maidan, it's a very prominent like Russian propaganda point that many people in the West unfortunately repeat. It's something that to regard that it was like a coup, like Western, coup to like to to push our pro-Russian president Yanukovych, and to basically I don't know, like whatever the fuck. It doesn't even really matter what they say. The point is that it was not a genuine revolution, but it was like some kind of like they would say that was by far right by Nazis. Yeah, I don't know, coup made sponsored by like Western powers or something like that. It's a very prominent Russian talking point. But the matter of fact is that more than 8 million people participated in that revolution physically, not
And the
Russian
Russians
agents.
do tend, to ignore the fact or the claim that the snipers involved in shooting at Euromaidan were
Yeah,
arguably
well,
Russian snipers, or so on and so forth, as many
yeah,
claims go.
they will like make absolutely baseless claims with no proof whatsoever. Hey, hello, thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Mitch.
they,
Thank you both for
yeah.
making this happen. Hearing her on the ground perspective has been amazing. Hopefully, this is the first of many interviews with her. Hint, hint. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you.
Thanks so
I
much,
really
Mitch.
appreciate it. That's very nice of you. Thank you. Hint, hint. Yeah, hint, hint in the end. Wink, wink. So basically, yeah, basically what they usually tend to say that sometimes they would make baseless claims without zero proof that
Yeah.
those snipers were actually uh basically our own people sniping at our own people, which is the something that Russians like, the conspiracy theories, I must say. So yeah, to be quite honest with you, it was a very it was about as genuine revolution as it gets, I must say. Insane amount of people participated, and main reason for that was just plain and good old-fashioned tyranny of Yanukovych, which was a pro-Russian president who was basically a puppet of Russia at that point, which he obviously escaped to Russia, to no other place than Russia, and have been staying there. But it's just he was trying very hardest to make us basically a puppet state of Russia. So most of Ukrainians wanted to be part of European Union, more than 60%. And they want us, all of us wanted, not who were pro Europe, pro West, wanted a functioning institution, wanted to have democracy, proper democracy, wanted to have human rights, wanted to have like everything that West is and Russia isn't, to put it simply. And he changed the course of it and said, no, fuck that, we're not going to European Union, we're actually going to Russia and to ally ourselves with Russia and with their stupid union. And that some people didn't like that, so students went to protest in Kiev at the time, and they were like, wait, come on, we're having for many years doing like the movement towards the West, so what is going on? We do not approve of that. And his answer to that was to beat them to a pulp. So basically, just straight up, students my age, I was 19 at the time, just to, nearly kill them, just beat them to incredibly awful state. And thousands of people after that went to the streets because they were just, wait, come on, this is not a way to treat its people. We have a right to protest. Why do we allow in like this tyrant, this like nobody president that we supposedly chose to treat us like that? And people were very mad, very angry at that. So many people did support European Union course, but quite a lot of people who were standing in on the square every day, they were not exactly like very pro-European. Even they were against tyranny, against this disregard. It was, we call it the revolution of dignity for a reason, because this was a revolution about our dignity as people. Are we willing to let them treat us that way as they treat people in Belarus, in Russia? No rights to protest pretty much whatsoever. And yeah, so we were standing up against that, and for ourselves, for our freedom, for our dignity. There's also such a thing as dictator laws, which is something that Yanukovych and his government tried to pull. They basically tried to, you can Wikipedia that thing when you have time, but it's just basically they tried to make us into Belarus, basically, when there is no right to protest. So you cannot gather, more than 5 people cannot gather. They have, if you do basically do protests without permission, then you will be arrested for like 10 years or something like that. So it's pretty like heavy dictatorship laws, as they known. Is there was the laws that he tried to pretty much make into a reality, to make us unable basically to protest, to and to like do it without revolution. Pretty much it was impossible at that point. I'm like 100% certain that there would be no actual how do you call it in English? The word escaped my mind. Elections, no elections in future after that. So this will be like Yanukovych for eternity, you know. How
Yeah,
Lukashenko in
yeah,
Belarus
like,
is what
yeah,
we would got.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
you've got
us,
to guard against these. I mean, this is what Timothy Snyder talks about, and so many people along these sort of lines. You've got to be really careful not to democratically backslide. It's so important to guard your
mhm.
institutions and your mechanisms of democracy, because before you know it, they're gone, and when they're gone, you're screwed.
Yes, for sure. That's what this was exactly what was happening at that moment in time. So yeah, so I was revolutionary at the time.
Were you
What
were
do you
you
say that
were
in
you in were you interested in politics before that, or did that get you interested in politics?
sorry, there's just a question I'm interested in. Would you say that in Ramadan, the secret services of Russia and USA were both engaged and basically canceled each other so that so that the will of the Ukrainian prevailed? No, I would not say it. The level of engagement of USA was nowhere near it was in Russian. Our president literally went to Russia to ask advice on how to stomp the protesters. You know, Berkut that attacked us, like forces that killed and 100+ protesters. Quite a lot of them were Russians, Russian citizens. We have Russian citizens in all institutions of power in the East. So in judges, in the office, in the parliament, there was like everywhere Russian influence on every corner. They were pretty much controlling our party of regions at that time, which is Yanukovych party. So
This is
no, I
so
would
important to
definitely,
say, but that's a really good question, though, Stefan, because I think
yeah,
I
for sure,
think
yeah.
that the narrative has been. I think the Russian disinformation campaign has been successful in sowing this. I wrote an article at the beginning of the war, like saying, "Well, this war, is more complicated than you think, and we've got to look at the fact that NATO was doing this as well as understanding this, but it's not on the same level, and
Yeah.
it's easy for people in America or Britain or Europe or wherever to sit there and go, oh yeah, America were getting their sticky paws stuck in just as much as Russia. Actually, no, there's a really
No.
big asymmetry
Yeah.
there, and it doesn't represent the fact that people were on the ground in Ukraine, just in, or as you say, in all institutions and all walks of life,
Hmm.
influencing things insidiously.
Yeah, most power in the most important institutions in the east of Ukraine and partially in the south as well were in the hands of either straight up Russian citizens or people who are affiliated with Russia. So oligarchs who are basically on Russia's payroll. So no, it's definitely not the same as making a phone
Mm.
call, you know,
No,
if you know
but
what I
that
mean.
but
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
great
So it's
question, Stefan. Really appreciate that
mhm.
because it
Yeah, it is
allows
for sure. Yeah,
allows
but I will say that the will of the Ukrainian people was definitely prevailed in that regard, despite like any effort, for sure, because the will was to stop this corruption, stop this tyranny, and yeah, that's hey, thank you. So yeah,
thanks,
so this is
Divinky.
basically what happened, and
But that's
sure,
a really
our
good point.
interest is
That's
yeah.
a really
Sorry.
good point you're talking about with the will of the people. So quite often people argue about Ukraine, like the war being the result of either NATO and the US or
Yeah, proxy
Russia,
war. Yeah.
but like because of the proxy war. And I argue it is a proxy war, but with nuance there. But what we must remember is that uh, people, when you do that, you forget to think about the self-determining rights and existence of the actual people of
Yes.
Ukraine. It's like, so you can argue that NATO and America were doing this, and you can argue that Russia were doing that, but the first people we should really go to and ask about what should happen here, which is, do you want to join the EU,
Hmm.
do you want to join NATO, are the
Yes.
Ukrainians. Let's stop seeing them as a pawn. They are a pawn, that's according to these players, but we should be concentrating more on what the Ukrainians themselves think.
Yeah, so I would not obviously deny that there is geopolitical bigger game, right?
Yeah.
So, but it depends. Like it's obviously the truth, but the truth of the matter is Russia invaded Russia annihilated our cities, our people, mass graves, genocides. I have no doubt in calling it what it is. So, yeah, so it's just they came with the straight up goal to annihilate our current democratically elected government. They came to the goal to with the goal to they say it themselves, it's not a secret, with the goal to remove Ukraine as an entity and to pretty much make our country um, non-existent. So prohibit our language, prohibit our culture, everything that it is Ukraine. So not NATO did not invade us, America did not invade us. Sure, our interests may ally with the European Union and the West, but this is something that Ukrainians want. Most Ukrainians now not only want to join European Union, they also want to join NATO, which before this invasion was less than majority. Most Ukrainians did not want to be part of NATO.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure that this interest may ally for sure, but we are our own people. And I think I think this year we showed just how strongly we believe in what we believe, and and how strong our will is in defending ourselves. It's not Americans or European or Western Europeans who are fighting this war. It's Ukrainians, sure, with the Western equipment, with the Western assistance, and we're super grateful for that. But the people who are dying and getting killed and dismembered are Ukrainians. So we think it's worth it. So don't doubt that. Don't never doubt that we think it's worth it. It's a sacrifice that
Yeah.
we're willing to pay.
And
Yeah.
that's amazing because this is, I mean, never again will NATO or the West or countries that find Russia a really big geopolitical problem, never again will they have a situation where you've got a country, Ukraine, saying, do you know what? We'll offer the people to die on the front. You just give
Yes.
us the stuff. And so this is where I'm like, why the hell did the Challenger 2 tank get made? Why the hell did the Leopard 2 tank get made? Why the hell? It was these things were envisioned to be weapons of war against realistically Russia. And so therefore
Yes.
my opinion is everyone just give everything they've got to Ukraine to get it over and done sooner rather than later, because you will never get another chance to put these machines to the function that they were designed, and never again will
Yes.
you get a chance to change Russia and the whole geopolitical area with the soldiers of another nation doing the tough work for you.
Yes, I would like to point out that when I talk with soldiers, which I do regularly because I, go visit them, but it's just I have many friends who fight as well, but they are not fighting just for Ukraine. So obviously Ukraine is the main thing, right? But because we're, are Ukrainians. But other than that, there's also many people understand that Georgia, Moldova, they all understand that they're also in the cards. So after us, it's them. Not
Yeah.
NATO countries, not European Union countries. Russia would not never invade those, but countries like Georgia, Moldova, who they previously already invaded, already
Mm.
annexed territories from there. It's nothing new. Most people just don't know about it, right? Before 2014, Ukraine. So yeah, so we are fighting for them as well. Not only because there's a will to do it, but also we are big. We are a big country. It's not Georgia. I love Georgia. My parents are from there, but it's just a small, little. It's not as it's still they kick pretty good ass there, a Russian ass, but it's just it's not we have support finally. The West like looks at this part of the world and decided to support us, which we are immensely grateful and forever will be. But now is the chance, like literally is the chance, not only for Ukrainians to defend ourselves and preserve ourselves, but also to show them that this is not, they cannot do this anymore. They cannot just invade, annex, kill people, loved ones, people's ruin families, ruin houses, ruin lives, and get nothing for that.
What do you think? What do you? Like I said, right, that I wrote an article right at the beginning of the war that said that Putin can't win this, because what my theory was, well, it's not just my theory. This is clearly what happened, which is Putin and the Russians came into Ukraine thinking they'd depose the government in a 2 to 5 day sort of political shift.
Yeah.
They had the Rosgvardia there to sort of sort out for over the next 2 weeks, clean up all the mess, and you've got a puppet government put in place. But then when the Ukrainians started fighting back, and they weren't expecting that, they're expecting to be welcomed with open arms and bunches of flowers, then they were accidentally, so it really was a special military operation to begin with. It really was that. And then they were
I could say, yeah.
accidentally caught in a war that they hadn't prepared for or predicted. So then they're in
Yeah.
in Ukraine, in a war where they are unable to achieve the objectives that they set out, that they originally came for. So I wrote this article saying Putin can't win. There's no way they can take over the whole of the country, and if they did, the country wouldn't want them there, and it would be just a nightmare trying to occupy that many people. And so there's no way Putin can win. And now, a year later, I say exactly the same thing. Like, I haven't changed my tune at all. Putin can't win. So the question for you is, what do you think? How do you think Putin can walk out of this? Can he walk out of this? My opinion is he probably can't. But how does this end for Putin? What's his objective now?
You know what? I like kind of like almost sympathize with the little Botox dictator, is Putin. I mean, because he got himself in a pickle. Yeah, that's for sure. So it's nothing like he envisioned. Two
Yeah.
factors basically is one, he did not expect, for some stupid reason, such a resistance amongst Ukrainians. And it's something that many people, soldiers and people say nobody met them with flowers, like, grenade flowers, maybe, like bouquet of grenades, maybe, And so this is it. And also the support of the West. They truly expected, we heard it with like intercepted conversation of their like Russian commanders several times. I heard it myself, like with the intercepted conversations. They were shocked with the amount of like weaponry and anti-air and everything. In my opinion, we received quite slow many things and way less than we could have, but that's another story. For Russians it was
Agreed.
a lot. It was a lot. They did not expect it. They expect Europe and the Western, European Union and United States to do nothing, to just let them do like what they did in Georgia, what they did in Moldova, and in 2014 Ukraine as well. So for them it was a huge fucking surprise, and as well as the Ukrainian resistance. So I do think they are in a pickle, because basically they are a full-on fascist country at the moment, unfortunately. So he needs to show his population some sort of victory. And as of now, he barely has anything. He barely has anything. We fully liberated north of Kiev. We pretty much almost liberated my Kharkivska Oblast, my region. And we also liberated, as you know, Kherson, which was one of their like biggest wins basically in this war. So at this point, they basically hold into Donbass and to parts of the south as well, which is Crimea, Donbass, and other several areas as well. So they gotta show something. Just to make an example of that, for example, with when Soviet Union invaded Finland and attacked Finns brilliantly defending their country. We are big fans of the Finnish people here, but this is just
Oh,
an
yeah.
example for us. Yeah, so but basically, but still lost like 10% of their territory to Russia. So the Russians, being Russians, showed in Soviet Union this 10% as a huge victory. They were like, actually, we won. They did not kick our asses, and those 10% of the territory is exactly what we wanted. We did not want to take whole country. We actually wanted to take 10%. And people were like, yay, glorious victory of Soviet Union. So this now they need something like that. But the problem is that people in Ukraine are so pissed off that they're not willing to budge. They're not willing to give them anything. We are
Have you
fully,
seen them stay resolute now? Are they just as strong on that now as they were, like not giving away anything?
for sure, like 100%. This is like pretty much everyone you talk with, like just civilians, not to mention soldiers. But just, yeah, so returning of, yay, welcome Finland to NATO. I agree. But this is just something that we are very strong about. We want to return to our borders before 2014 invasion. And this is our world recognized borders that we have every right to have. And also, nothing more I cannot imagine something more horrifying than leaving our people in occupied areas, knowing what Russians do to people there. So before like Bucha, before Hostomel, like northern Kiev, regions, it was kind of like not as dire. But after that, after we saw what basically the genocide of the population they did there, Izum in my Kharkivska Oblast, very close. Actually, going to go there in sometime soon again. But basically, those mass graves, torture chambers, everything. After that, how can you even consider living people in those conditions, living people in their hands? So yeah, it's quite impossible even to imagine that, in my opinion. We own those people. For people like in Kherson, when they were like praying basically every day just to for Ukraine to liberate them, and to leave them like that is not right, and it's not just. So yeah, so most people for sure want to liberate everything, every single
But that
piece of. We want nothing of theirs. We only want
right.
what is ours.
That leads me nicely onto one of the big questions I think is, and then maybe I don't. There may be no answer to this. I don't know. We have to all wait till it happens. I don't know. I'd be interested in your ideas of Donbass and Crimea. Now, I think Crimea might be easier personally, but hey, what do I
Hmm.
know? But when it
Yeah,
comes
yeah.
to let's assume Ukraine prevail, right? And they win the war,
Hmm.
and Russia have to pull out of Crimea and Donbass.
Hmm.
There's a really big challenge for Ukraine because there's still going to be a lot of population in both of those areas that will be pro-Russian. Now, I know a lot of those would have been Russians that were brought into the to the regions after 2014. So you might expect some of those to go back. But there's been a lot of internally displaced people moving from those regions after the outbreak in 2014 and after 2022, moving out to other places that then leave behind predominantly pro-Russian people. So
Hmm.
how do you solve that problem going forward?
So basically, although there are definitely pro-Russian people in those areas, especially those who have been consuming Russian propaganda for a very long time at this point, but their amount of them, the number of them, is first of all highly exaggerated. So many people tell me that my Kharkiv is pro-Russian, which is, just because we speak Russian, and
Yeah,
this is definitely not true even in the slightest. So so this is exaggerated. Most of my friends and people I know actually from Donbass, and quite a lot of Donbass people, I presume, would want to return. They're scattered all over Ukraine now, and they would want to maybe return and rebuild and stuff like that. But also there is a question of people just um, quite a lot of pro-Russian people actually changed their mind after this whole phase of the invasion. They
right.
saw who is an actual aggressor is. This also something that happened. And yeah, when it comes to this, I do believe that we will manage to deal with it. And there's also the question of those like Russian who have been basically like this is mostly a Crimea problem, but that quite a lot of Russians from Russia um, were just being like usual thieves and marauders. They just basically stole people's apartments who escaped from Crimea, especially Tatari, by the way, who are native people of Crimea, by the way, who Russians previously annihilated to
Mm.
import Russians there. So that's another story. But yeah, so quite a lot of them just literally live in people's houses. Yeah, so
I
more.
guess one of the options is to do what Russia did themselves, which is move people in there. Now there'll be, as you say, people who have been displaced anyway, moving back. But that could
Mhm.
be one of the options to do, which is to incentivize Ukrainians to move to Donbass and
Yeah,
Crimea to say,
I
because
think
we need.
the most ethical, как бы, basically, also they're fucking cowards. Most of them will run Russians back to Russia. They already do. There was like one boom in Crimea, and they were like, live in Crimea like in packs, basically. So this is actually what I want. I want them to voluntarily fuck off, to leave, and just us letting them, of course, not shooting at them and anything like that, just letting them leave to back to Russia, which they moved to illegally annexed territory. So they're like moving there is illegal. They were breaking law literally, both Ukrainian and international. So they can, as far as I'm concerned, fuck off. But people who will want to remain, well, as long as they don't do anything like, straight up anti-Ukrainian, like sabotage and collaborating with the Russian army, then I think they can stay, and that's fine. But if they were like basically
You've broken up for
collaborators
me, or
with
are you back?
Russia, then have to be prosecuted, or things like that. I would prefer, of course, to not do any like
Yeah,
deportations in like
yeah.
sense of like, because it's just nasty to do. But I do think most of them, first of all, will run away, because they know what they done. And second of all, they will most likely just adopt quite a lot of them. So I have like still like people who are like pro-Russian, even like in Kharkiv. They're a very small minority, like couple percent, but they exist. Those people just remain silent. They just adapt, basically, is what I'm saying.
Before we get to Mitch's question, what do those pro-Russians want? Like, because I find it interesting that even in, like, and I saw a bit of footage today from Lviv, right, which is Western Ukraine, and it was outside a church, and a young kid was protesting, and then these old ladies came up and remonstrated, another man, and one of them saying basically, "I'm Russian," and they're giving her a hard time when
Hmm.
she's like, are you not seeing this war? And I wonder, those pro-Russians. I mean, what do they want? What is it? What is it they're itching for?
I can answer that pretty, I guess, try to answer it in a short way. But basically, most of those people are incredibly insecure, and they feel inferior because they're Ukrainians ethnically, or something like that. I have ethnic Ukrainians who are very against, who are, would you say, like pro-Russian, because they have been made belittled and ridiculed. They're like generations for being Ukrainian, for speaking Ukrainian. So they assimilated and basically envisioned themselves as part of Russian world. So Russians, so to speak, little Russians, so to speak, right? And they have this very complex relationship, I guess, with their own identity, which is partially Russia's fault, partially their own fault. And yeah, because of that, they basically despise everything Ukrainian, just like say self-hatred, I guess, like like internalized racism, sort of something like that. Not exactly, but similar concept. So for them, Russia is like good, and they want to be basically part of Russian world, and they don't want to just like normal people, move to another country if they don't want to live in this one. But they want Russians to come here and make this Russia. So this is like a very strange idea to most people, I guess,
I
because
guess, I
if I
guess
want to
the
live in France, yeah, sorry.
well, no, I'm sorry. I just want to build on that, which or get an idea of what is it about Russia that they like. Like, what is it? Like, I'm Western, right, or I'm British, and I'm used to my history and my culture and my sense of politics and democracy and whatever. What is it that is attractive about Russia? What is it? Is it some myth about what Russia
Hmm.
was? Or,
Yes,
or
yes,
is
yes,
there
yes.
something attractive about Russia that I don't get because I'm not in that context?
Mostly it's the mythos, like like the something that it's like idea of Russia, not even Russia themselves, but it's just being part of this like glorious great empire is like something that is attractive to people, so they want to be
Mm.
part of that, and they, like I said, despise themselves, like for example, like a very great story, I think, if you have time, like to illustrate this, is my teacher of Ukrainian and Ukrainian literature when I was a kid in school, told this story to me, and I was not as impressed of it by then than I am now. Now I understand it better. But basically, the story is about her. She is was a very young like woman, and she came from a village to Kharkiv to work as a teacher. So she was Ukrainian speaker. She came to Kharkiv, which was Russian speaking primarily, right? And back in the day, and recently, I must say, like maybe 15, 10 years ago, there was like this idea that being Ukrainian, speaking Ukrainian, you are rural, you are like uncultured, you are like I don't know, barbarian is a strong word, but like rural, basically, like
Yeah,
you're like a dumb basically, like a
country
villager.
bumpkin.
And
Yeah,
Yeah. If you speak Russian, you're like cultural, you are like part of intelligentsia, you're smart.
Right.
If you speak Ukrainian, you're like a nobody, a dum-dum, basically. So people were very um, embarrassed to speak Ukrainian in Ukraine, even as recently as
Right.
20, 15 years ago. So basically what she did, she learned herself to speak Russian and almost ditched her accent entirely. So she was speaking pretty much like most almost clear Russian. So she pretended she was Russian speaker, and she made friends in the school, like teachers who were all Russian speakers. And she like, basically what she did is like she made herself like this chameleon, like part of their club. And then she got pregnant, and she was given birth in a hospital. And her mother, who was still speaking Ukrainian, a Ukrainian speaker, came like kilometers, like in a very cold weather, like in the middle of winter, like minus like 20 degrees or something like that of Celsius. This old lady just came to, visit her daughter in the hospital, to see the grandchild, to, see her daughter and the baby. And she came to the room, to the hospital room, when my teacher was staying. And at that moment, unfortunately, there were her friends from school who only knew her as a Russian speaker. So her mother came to the room, and she was like in Ukrainian, my baby gave birth, like here's my grandchild in Ukrainian. And my teacher was so mortified for her friends to find out that her mother is a Ukrainian speaker, that she pretended that she doesn't know her mother. So she said like,
Right.
who are you, crazy woman? I don't know you. And her mother just was, she understood why, So she just stood there in silence and just went away. So this was, by the way, the last time she saw her. She died afterwards in a year.
No.
So yeah, so my teacher said that the only sound that was heard in the room was the sound of her mother's heartbreak, because she basically,
Yeah.
awful, awful story. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. It's a
The only
fascinating insight. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, that I do think illustrates pretty well the relationship
Yeah.
many Ukrainian speakers had with their heritage, with their relatives, with their language, with their being Ukrainian, with their Ukrainian identity as a whole. Yeah, and my teacher regretted that immensely her entire life. Afterwards, she spoke only Ukrainian, even back then when I was, in school. So she regretted it, but there's there's no way to ask for forgiveness, I guess. But there's just something that to illustrate how embarrassed people were. So even when I was like a small kid, I would see people in the eastern Ukraine like point fingers, like in the metro station or somewhere, like at people speaking Ukrainian. It was that bad.
Wow.
So yeah,
Wow.
so yes, yeah. So those things changed a lot, I must say, and I'm very happy about it and very grateful that nobody points fucking fingers at the Ukrainian
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah.
Ukrainian. But yeah, but just it's to understand like how actually awful the effects of Russification and Russian imperialism were, not on Ukrainian identity as a whole.
So thanks for that, and I think that was a really useful anecdote there. Mitch asks, "What can Anastasia tell us about
Good
current
job.
current enacted policies to combat Russian FSB agents and moles in the unoccupied Ukrainian territories? Does she feel this has been generally effective?"
I'd say
I
so.
don't know. Do
Yes.
you hear any stories in Kharkiv about what is whether people have been rooted out as being sort of collaborators?
Yeah, I
I
do.
guess.
I actually know quite a bit of people. Fortunately, I guess, or unfortunately, are from security services of Ukraine. So exactly the people, as Boo, exactly the people who do the hunting of the moles of the Russian engines. So yeah, they have been pretty effective. They busted like a bunch of people in the in both. Our institutions, our officials, also people in police and everywhere, like, and also most interestingly in the church, which is like Moscovian
Yeah.
patriarchate church. There's like a bunch of collaborators and pro-Russian agents there that would literally, those like priests that would just give away the information about our soldiers, their location, to the Russian agency,
Well,
So
there's a long
yes, so
history. There's a long history of KGB being involved with the the Russian Orthodox Church. You've got
Yeah, they
Patriarch
use it as a
Kirill
tool.
as
Yeah.
being a former
Hmm.
KGB agent himself,
Yeah.
and so
Fuck that guy.
that's decades of that happening. So that would be absolutely no surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, so for Russian Orthodox, like a Moscovian Patriarch Church, it's basically has its tentacles in many countries, not just Ukraine. So, yeah, so it's just it's like an inside mole, basically, like an agent that basically serves Russia, which is pretty bad, obviously. And yeah, so many people have been I don't even know how many, like dozens and dozens of people have
Mm.
been found out to be collaborating with Russia, getting money from them and stuff like that. So our services has done a pretty good job, I'd say, in this year to find them and to prosecute them as well.
You just not particularly related to that, because I mean that's really important. Like information is power, and information is key in terms of executing successful war. But just wondering about. I've completely forgotten. I had an MS brain moment. It'll come back to me. Carry on speaking about that. About the.
But that's basically what I wanted to say. So you're in trouble.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm
Leave me
sorry.
hang out to dry there.
I failed you.
Yeah,
Oh.
absolutely. So going back to Kharkiv, have what are your experiences at the moment? Do you think Kharkiv is is it vulnerable to be taken again, or do you think the
No.
days of that city, for example, the days of that being threatened by Russia are over?
No, definitely not. There's like zero chances of them managing to. We were less defended, less like good at defending ourselves back then, and we managed to, protect the city with literal like territorial defense with just civilians and stuff like that. And now we have, of course, a regular army with experience, with much better equipment, much better weaponry. And I know this because when it was at the beginning, they were looking pretty, rough, and now they look like NATO super soldiers. Like not all of them, obviously, but quite a lot of them. I recently just bought for my friend who is a sniper, like full on NATO like package of like equipment. So I, got him like amazing protective vest, helmet, gear that has to do headphone gear, stuff like that. So basically like meteor stations, so he can, so he can use it to understand like the weather conditions, to shoot probably like very high tech stuff that Ukrainians never had
There is
before.
a theory. There's a claim that a lot of the good equipment doesn't find its way to the front lines. So when you're looking at troops
Mm-hmm.
fighting in Bakhmut, and you see this equipment coming in from, if I bring up the map again, this equipment's coming in from the east, right? Sorry, from the west. And you can imagine that as it goes from, say, Poland all the way through to the front lines, that people are dipping into that equipment as it goes through Ukraine. And there are some claims that soldiers to the west are better equipped than soldiers fighting on the east. Is that an issue that you've heard?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it happens, yeah. Also there are some problems like with logistics, with stuff like that, with and also in the west some soldiers are better equipped despite not participating in the active for it's stupid, but it does happen. So I'm not gonna deny that, but overall it's just you have to understand things like it's just equipment, it's just always needed. So
Yeah.
one like blast and your helmet already is not you cannot use it anymore. So my friend recently got shot basically, and his vest was pierced through, so he needed a new one, obviously, right? But it's just war, it consumes resources with intense, like with a crazy intensity. So of course, yes, this is an issue, and there's also an issue that some troops are better equipped than others. For example, like a couple of my friends who I bought the first quad bike for, they're Sprut. They are very well equipped, so they're like have great equipment, great stuff. Still, they needed help, obviously, because quad bike was not provided. It's something that volunteers bought for them. But overall, they're like whole, their weapons, they're like protective gear. It's all high quality, very great. But artillery, for example, guys who I recently also visited, they are in a awful conditions. So they did not even have like in the winter times like thermal wear, so like clothing that is warm. They have frost bites, awful frost bites. It was very bad. So we managed to get for them gloves, scarves, like masks, headgear that was very warm, so they could stop being frozen all the time. And yeah, so some are better than others for sure, and it's not always clear how our like commanders are deciding who gets what, basically, is what I'm saying. So it's a problem that does exist, sure, but it's not like as awful as some people paint it. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. So actually, I just remembered that we didn't get your answer on how do you think Putin can win?
Oh,
We kind
yeah.
of went off on
So
one, didn't we? But because that's a really key thing. Because if he's going to have an off ramp, as they say, well, of course the Ukrainians won't want an off ramp. They just want Putin out of there. So there's only defeat of the Russians. How do you see, like, how can Putin get out of this?
so
Because I know you
basically,
said
what I
you feel
think
sorry for him.
I, I was,
Yeah, well,
jesting.
no,
Fuck that
yeah,
guy.
yeah,
Yeah, but yeah,
in that way.
just the thing is, of course, that what I was trying to say when I was talking about Finland and 10% and Soviets making it seem like it's what a victory is. If they had something like that, it would be easy. Sorry. Oh, air raid, air
Do
raid,
you,
air raid.
do you have to
Ah,
go then?
no, fuck it. If something explodes, I will move. If not, then I will just stay here.
Jesus, I hope I'm
So
not
so
responsible for your
so
demise.
Uh, it's every day don't care that much. So so basically, what I'm was trying to say is that we would give him nothing is going on. I think I will check it with my phone if something explodes, or I can hear the vibration sometimes. But anyhow, it's just thing is. So if we gave him something he could present as a victory, it would be easier out for him for sure. But since we don't want to do that, and we are not gonna do it, so I think the only way he has is to lose, because he has been winning, so to speak, for quite some time and getting away with killing thousands of people with like a slap on the wrist at best. I think it's time for it to end. I think it's time for Russia to lose and to be put in a conditions that are not exactly like some sort of justice, some sort of punishment has to be met. Some sanctions should be prolonged, things like that, right? So they have been isolation is a good way to do it, and I do believe that Putin will fall and his regime will fall. I don't know who exactly will replace him, and if they will be much better than he was.
This is one of the worries is that whoever replaces him might well be worse or just as nationalistic and no different really.
Yeah, it's true and it's bad, but to be like 100% frank with you, I don't care that much like what happens to Russia, and
Mm.
all I want is them gone from Ukraine, their troops. If they decide to stop the invasion and go on their merry way back home, good. If not, then the only thing we can do is continue defending ourselves and killing the enemies. And at some point, when we take back more and more and more and more, then we would have much more power in negotiations as well, maybe potential ones in the future, right? But our only condition is for them to get the fuck out. That's the only thing we want. And I think it's time for Putin to fall. And if we can assist in that, then we will. But there's also some responsibility on Russians, they gotta do something in their life for once to make their lives better. So it's not on us to give them the good government. It's on them. They need to do something about it, and they frankly could if they wanted to, if they had the will to do it. Because I participated in a huge revolution when we were shot at, we were beaten, killed, and we stood our ground. We survived. We fought. Some died. Many died. So yeah. So this is something they potentially could have done but didn't. So it's not up to me to decide their fate, it's up to them. So I hope they will, I guess, get their shit together and maybe strive for something more deserving of humankind than this.
Well, as we sort of meander our way towards a conclusion here, I've just got a few more questions. If anyone has any super chats, any questions they want to get in for my guest, please do so. Make sure you're safe there, though, please. Are you all right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
fine.
okay,
It's an air
cool.
raid, but nothing is going off so far. So if something goes off, I probably will either hear it
Yeah.
or someone will barge in in my room and tell me to go to the corridor. Or my sister, for example. Yeah.
So I was going to ask, similar to what I've asked before about pro-Russian sentiment, but is there a definite generational divide? Is there a correlation between young and old in Ukraine as far as being really pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian? Is it? Do you get many younger pro-Russians outside of the eastern sort of areas?
I'd say that right now the divide it definitely is a divide and was a divide in age. Younger people tend to be more pro-Western, and they tend to be definitely Ukraine, more patriotic, more Ukraine, pro-Ukraine.
Yeah,
But it's kind of silly to talk about it now. Pro-Russian, pro-Ukraine. We are Ukraine, it's not.
yeah,
We are not even pro-Ukraine, just Ukraine. We want to be Ukraine. It's
yeah,
not, it's not a political thing. You want to be Russia
yeah,
or you want to be Ukraine, but it's just it used to be a thing, obviously, but since 2014 that gap has been closing between older people and younger people, and now I literally see like old 70 plus people removing the Soviet stars from the money from like the streets. So now they're, yeah, I think they made that connection between
yeah.
suffering they endured before in Soviet Union and Russia, and how Russia is at the is the one who have been committing all those things and now is committing. And yeah, so Russia actually helped us to feel more united between like different ages, because previously you would find more pro-Soviet nostalgia in like older people, obviously, and way less in the younger people. But now most people are um, kind of like united in the idea that this is like unjust invasion, this war is fucking horrible, and people who started it are Russians, and they are the ones to blame, not anyone else. So this is I guess I talked with like the very when I was in Poltava, I actually had a conversation with a like a very old lady, and she was born in the year of 1933, which is Holodomor. I don't know if you know, or you're
Yeah.
like, yeah. So not the best time to be a baby. Let's put it like that. So it was a huge Soviet-made famine in Ukraine that
Mm.
pretty much annihilated 4 million people in Ukraine. So she was the only baby, one of the few children who survived in her village. So her life was very rough in the beginning, and then she survived World War II as a teenager, obviously, like no, as a young kid, right? And then she was Stalin repressions, deportations, all sorts of stuff, and yeah, so her life was rough, and she was from Mariupol, and she escaped there. And she, by the way, said that what Russians did in Mariupol was worse than what Nazis did when they, the Nazi occupation. She also survived. So some of her family was Holocausted as well. So in the camps. And yeah, so basically, she said that what Russians did in Mariupol was way worse. And I kind of believe her. She survived that. She knows both things. She knows what she's talking about. And she was
Wow.
crying, and I talked with her, and the one of the saddest thing I personally heard is she said that it's so unfair that the way she came to this world is basically the way she's going
Right.
away, because she's like, yeah, because she was born in war and now she's dying soon, quite soon, because she's very old, and she's now living her last days also in war, in like occupation and in death and
Yeah.
grotesque, awful sights of war, and her home has been annihilated pretty much, and her city as well. So yeah, this is very a sad reality, I guess,
Humanity,
for older
yeah.
people.
Humanity
And she
doesn't
told
learn, does
me,
it?
Yeah, and she told me she was like not exactly like pro-Russian, but more like a she was sympathetic, let's put it like that, to Russia. So she felt them like a fraternal nation, like a brotherly nation. She's a Russian speaker, spoke like Russian her whole life. So for her, I would say this whole invasion, full-on invasion, is much more of a, I guess, betrayal and a hit, yeah, than it is to me, because I kind of expected it, to be honest, at some point. So yeah, since 2014, I realized what Russians think of us, how they see us, how they treat us, and I have been ever since pretty much expecting something like this to happen. Maybe not to such extent, obviously, right? Did not expect my father to be blown up, obviously, but overall, I thought that this would happen at some point. But but she was like very distraught, and I think this, to answer your question, this people like her, very elderly people who would be, so to speak, Russian sympathizers, have pretty much changed their position quite a lot. So yeah.
Interesting. And how do you feel about the counteroffensive that's just building up? That's my theory is probably going to take place a bit later than people might have originally thought. I think
Yeah.
you need to get the equipment in, you need to get the trained people in, you need to get the maintenance and supply chains in. So I would say you're talking about May time would be my
Yeah,
guess,
probably, yeah.
maybe late May. But
Late spring,
how
yeah.
how do you feel about that? Are you confident, overly confident, or do you think you still don't have enough equipment? And even if that succeeds as far as the counteroffensive goes, will you have enough to sustain the momentum to make that successful? Or do you think, because this then leads on to my last question, which is, you know, if you need to sustain that momentum and you need an awful lot more, do you worry about your allies tiring and getting bored of the whole thing?
So I'm not a military,
Yeah,
strategy
yeah,
person,
yeah,
obviously, right? So I cannot like be confident in like any prediction. But what
yeah,
soldiers tell me and what they think is that they're gonna be effective, and they're gonna be just as good as they were in Kharkiv Oblast counteroffensives, which liberated pretty much entire oblast. In oblast is like a word for province,
yeah.
region, in like I guess what, a week or two. Too bad my
Although
father
the
did not
Russians would
live.
be far, yeah. Sorry to interrupt because that's really important. But the Russians are far more defended now, though, aren't they? They've
Yeah,
dug
true, but we
themselves
are
in.
we are we are also much more experienced and much more
Mm.
well equipped. So it's
Yeah,
counterbalance, I guess. It
yeah,
will be hard for sure, but I do think it's possible to do. And my very like sad that my father did not live long enough to witness, I guess, the counteroffensives and the
mm,
liberation of the Kharkiv Oblast, because he was so waiting on that. He would call me like every day pretty much, and he would be like, when it's going to start? And I was like, well, no, Dad, I'm like, I talk with soldiers, but I'm not like into the secrets, when they're going to start the counteroffensive. It's information that is not told to civilians, obviously, right? And but he was like always, oh, when it's gonna start? And he just a little bit, and it would have happened. But well, anyhow, just the thing is that I do think we will be quite effective, and of course, it will highly depend on the continuous support of our allies.
mm.
Obviously, right? We got those tanks finally, and now we need to learn how to use them properly. But the tanks was something that really, really, needed, and we got way more than we even expected. Our like chief commander Zaluzhny said that we need 300 basically to start the effective counteroffensives, but we got more. So it's pretty good, but we need to start learn how to use them. We need to accustom ourselves to it, and it takes time, obviously, like you said. It maybe like in the late part of the spring, the counteroffensives. So yeah, I do think we will be successful. At least I believe that, and I hope we manage to do it as swiftly as we did, but also be careful about our own losses, which is something important to me. I don't want like lives of our soldiers to be like thrown, away just because just like Russians, use their like soldiers to put them into fucking meat grinder is what they do, right? But it's not our strategy. At least it has not been so far. We are much more careful with our forces, and we are trying um, to preserve people as much as possible.
That was
Yeah.
actually the best way. That was the best way to understand why Kherson didn't work as well as people were thinking. So people were expecting, because the Russians will cut off, that they'd then be surrounded and attacked, and you'd get a lot of Russian losses. But actually, the most successful thing the Russians have done in the whole war is is withdrawing from Kherson. And I
Yeah.
think that's best understood when you see the objective of the Ukrainians wasn't to destroy as many troops as possible, but was to take the territory with losing as few Ukrainian
Yeah.
troops as possible. And as soon as you understand that as their main objective, then Kherson makes a lot more sense.
Yes, because not only is just, I think, like morally right to value lives of your people, obviously, but also it's just pure strategically. We are much less people than them, you know. They're like
Yeah,
have much more. So yeah, for us throwing away our like soldiers, especially those with experience, especially those, it's a huge difference between a soldier who has been fighting like even for 6 months or like 5 months and a newbie who just got enlisted, and it's just this is the quality of their troops right now because they just they recruit like um prisoners, like I don't know, like
mm.
people who with zero experience, just throw them into the just go die basically. Is not
You,
something we do, and I think it should be clear that it's the right thing to do, I guess.
what's a good, like, if you were a barometer of the, if you could evaluate the morale of the Ukrainian troops that you speak to, where do you think it's at the moment after a year?
um Mm, But basically, it has been it maybe like fluctuate a little bit every now and then, but it's like hold steady about 9 out of 10 easily. So yeah, so maybe like from 8 to 10 from 8 to 10, like depends
Yeah,
on the on the time of the year. If you're like swimming in the mud, they generally get unhappy just because of that, because our soil is very strange. It's like very specific type of soil called chernozem, which is like black earth. It's very dark and it's
yeah,
very like oily. It's super duper fertile, which is one of the
yeah,
reasons why so many emperors wanted a piece of us in feudal times, because there's a saying that you drop a seed and it grows just on its own because the soil is so fertile. But the downside of it is that it is a bit like it's oily and it's a bit greasy, and it's like how to say it, like a mush a little bit, like
yeah,
it's very shit just drones in it, like tanks, like
yeah,
machinery, just it's very slippery and very hard to even move. Even like just like as a civilian, you just go outside in the winter or springtime and it's all like slippery, and it's very
yeah.
it's
I saw
specific type
some
of
video
soil for sure.
footage of
Yeah.
a tank battle in Verkhnokha Mianska the other day, and as the tanks were going across the fields, it just churns up this black. You could see from so far away these black track marks
Yeah,
where the
that's it.
tanks just like
Yeah.
churn it up, and it's, yeah, you get, that's where
It
it
was
gets now.
actually a very strange experience when I was a child. I remember very clearly being confused with the way the earth looks outside of Ukraine. So I'm Greek actually, like ethnically. Yeah, yeah, I'm
Right.
Ukrainian nationality wise, but
Yeah. Yeah.
ethnically I'm Greek. Most of me is Greek. So I basically bits of Polish, Russian as well, but mostly Greek. So I was like, I think maybe 7 or 6, something like that. And I was with my father. We traveled to Greece, and my mom as well, and my sister. And I remember like looking outside the window, and just in Greece, the soil was red. It was like
Yeah.
very reddish, like brown reddish type of color, And I was like, "What the heck is this? Like, what's the? It's a Mars or something, like another
What
planet."
weird country
Because
is
it's yeah,
this?
yeah,
Freaks.
yeah. Because it's just so kind of like the way like the sky looks and the Earth looks is kind of like, I guess, like for a child, you only when you think Earth, you think black, like dark brown, like very dark color, right? And here, Earth is basically like reddish, something. And I was very confused by that. I didn't know that apparently most of the world looks like Mars. In Ukraine, is kind of different than most countries because of the specific type of soil. Yeah, but it causes trouble as well in wartime. It's very hard to
Absolutely.
do proper like offensives in springtime because of this like slippery thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Da Vinci, for, I know Smith said that they would love to contribute, and you did it on their part, so that's
Thank
really
you.
kind of you. As we come to the end now, I know there are more questions there. There's someone that's asking a question about Bandera and whether the
Oh, the usual.
approach. Well, no, I think it was slightly more nuanced. It was like, does the of course, you need to know about Bandera himself. I don't know if this is something that you
Oh
know
yeah,
much
I
about.
read
I have
that
another
Bandera
question.
was a big.
Was a
I read
big
that
thing in
Bandera was a big
Western
thing.
Ukraine, and
Uh
not
huh.
at all further east. Is this divide still relevant and present, or is it going away gradually? I don't know. I
That's a good
suppose
question.
this
Hmm.
might be the last question for you then. And would
Hmm.
you, as quickly as you can, I guess, and that's really difficult, explain to the viewers who Bandera is and
So basically, it's a good question, by the way. I expected a worse one. Apologies, Stefan. But it's just basically is Bandera was a Ukrainian nationalist leader who was in World War II times mostly, and afterwards as well a bit, very much like made into a boogeyman by Soviet Union and Russia as this figure of. Basically evil, awful Ukrainian nationalists who are collaborators with Nazis, who are like Nazis themselves, and who are just pure evil that everyone should be afraid of. And they basically said that most Ukrainians are like that in the West, and they deported, like Operation West is a pretty known thing. They deported more than 100,000 of Ukrainians to Siberia because of their supposed assistance to Nazis. Same thing they did with Tatari, by the way. They called them collaborators and traitor nation, and also deported them the fuck away to Siberia. Like almost entire ethnicity was removed from Crimea. But that's like another story. So Bandera was indeed a nationalist, and it did indeed his own UPA, his Ukrainian partisan army organization. At some point collaborated with Nazis, which is correct because mostly because for them, Bolsheviki, Soviet Union, and Red Army was the enemy. So they saw Soviet Union with good reason after Red Terror period as the main aggressor towards Ukrainian identity, towards Ukraine, and they wanted independence, they wanted liberation, and Germans basically never did pretty much anything to them at that point. So they thought as for some time that Nazis will help Ukraine to gain its independence, which is false and wrong. But they believed that. So yeah, after they realized that Hitler pretty much did not see Ukrainians as people like whatsoever, we were like third on his list of scum that needs to be annihilated, and they were like, oh well, so it didn't work out. So they eventually started to fight both like Red Army and Nazis at the same time. And Bandera himself spent most of his time in actually concentration camp, German concentration camp, and his brothers, by the way, were killed in concentration camps, Auschwitz, I believe. So yeah, so it's not exactly like the Nazi figure people present him to be, but he did in fact committed quite a lot of not so great things like acts against Jews, anti-Semitic attacks. He pretty much killed quite a lot of communist Jews and just Jews in general, and also Poles who he saw as occupiers, by the way, of his Ukraine, which they kind of were at the time. So very like I guess you could say not controversial kind of figure because he did some good and he did some very awful stuff as well. So he's praised in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine, more than in the East, to answer your question, because he was seen there as a liberator because he was fighting mostly for the Western, Ukraine at that point, and he was from there, from Lviv. So
I
definitely
mean,
more of the hero to them.
history is nuanced, right? And things aren't black and white; they're
For sure,
grey.
yeah.
And that you hear. I was listening to. I think it might be enemy. Sorry, not enemy of the gates. It's the Gates of Europe. The history book on Ukraine I was reading, and talking about how there were some places during the war that were better under the Nazi occupation than the Red
Yeah,
Army occupation,
for sure. Yeah.
and then there were other places that were worse under the Nazi occupation than the
Yes,
Red
yes,
Army.
yes, yes,
So
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
it's we simplify history and we simplify politics and we simplify life just far too much. I mean, you can go and watch some great
For sure.
documentaries by Adam Curtis, like Bitter Lake and Hypernormalization, all these, and Power of Nightmares, which talk about simplifying these problems into good and evil, and it never does justice to really what goes on in history.
Yes, yes. So Bandera was pretty much vilified to an insane degree, and he was like the poster boy for evil Ukrainian nationalists. And yeah, so pretty much people in the east were much more felt much more, like, let's say, saw him as like as a villain much more than the Western people did, of course, because they have been under Russia and they have been culturally in the Russian sphere and consuming Russian narratives. So for the most people in Soviet Union times in the East, Bandera was the villain in the Eastern Ukraine. Now this kind of changed because sure, people, he's still more popular in the West, obviously, but people understand now that the story is a bit more complicated than we were, than we were taught, and that they were fighting for independence, for freedom of Ukrainian people, sometimes in a very wrong ways, but they were desperate. They were very desperate. They were behind two those giant powers that were trying to fucking annihilate Ukraine yet again. So yeah, so for them it was also his mother, his sister, I believe, his father were all killed, and one of his brothers as well, by Russians, by Soviet Poles, Polish and Russians. So by Soviet Bolsheviki, the red, the communists. So this was a very terrible time, very horrible time, and people definitely made some great mistakes. And I do believe that praising him for his attempts to liberate Ukraine, to fight against both those like evil, empires, basically tearing us down, is something that is fine to do. We can both celebrate the good things that Upa did, and we can basically say that the bad parts were awful, and we can admit that people are, complicated, especially in a complicated time. So I would say this people are more nuanced about that now than they used to be in the East Ukraine, but still in the West he has more, I guess you could say. People praise him more there than they do here, for sure. Yeah, still.
Brilliant.
But
Thank you.
again,
That's it.
you can, yeah, you can be critical, and like you can denounce it, like I do, obviously. Attacks on Jews,
Mm.
not good, to say the least, right? But you can at the same time say that the person was trying to do, and to liberation of Ukraine is something I also fight for, in my own way, which I relate to. I relate to the struggle, and I relate to many things that they experienced. And I read quite a bit of their own personal accounts, of their letters, of things they did, of things they felt. And it was awful time for them as well, despite the fact that, of course, what they did was not always clean and good, which, by the way,
Yeah.
all very, very little people did all clean and good things in World War II times. Let's put it like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's just, yeah.
As I say, it's easy to think in terms of black and white, but reality is grey. Um, well,
Yeah.
look, I guess now's the time to wrap this up. You're getting a lot of love in the uh, in the comments, so people are
Thank
really
you.
appreciative of the time you spent here, as am I. And thank you so much for this. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. Would you be at some point in the future be up for another chat to see how things are going on, to talk
Yes,
about more
definitely.
issues? Cool
Yeah, of
beans.
course. Yeah, I will be
Excellent.
working with like a journalist, a friend of mine, in like this week, I think. But after that, I'm like pretty much free. We can
Yeah,
arrange something. Yeah, for
yeah, that's
sure.
fantastic. Well, look, I really appreciate all the fantastic comments in the live chat as well. Uh, I'm really happy with some of with the community that I've tried to nurture on my channel, and some really wonderful people in the chats. But I just want to go back and say thank you so much, and I'm sure my guests will appreciate this as well. All the great contributions from so many people. Mitch Ashdown and Clemens Moser just at the end here, but Mitch Mazarol, Cheryl, Aaron Adair, Da Vinci, all the people, and the many that I haven't mentioned again, all the people that have really helped this channel, and hopefully, help some guys get a quad bike on the front.
Yeah,
Is
thank
is
you. Appreciate
is
it.
there any is there anything you would like to say? Stefan Heinzmann was another one. Is there anything you'd like to say to sort of wrap things up at all?
It was a very pleasant, to talk with you. Yeah, great interview. I really appreciate pretty much anyone who wants to hear like Ukrainian side of things, and I do really think it's important to us for sure, because we have been muted for such a long time. We have been silenced and made quite invisible, and people suddenly like very much care about what we have to say. It's a nice change and we appreciate it. Also, thank you to pretty much everyone who donated and asked questions, and thank you all. I really appreciate it, and I'm grateful. Thank you. So this is basically all I have to say. The fight continues, the struggle continues, and I appreciate every single one of you who, who makes the effort to care enough, I guess, for people on the pretty far away from you all, I assume.
Yeah,
So
that's
I,
a really
yeah,
that's a
so
really good point. The fact that I'm continually amazed, and I've only got a tiny channel compared to some of these huge channels. People like reporting from Ukraine who get like bazillions of people watching a day, but even with my own very modest viewership, I'm amazed and pleased that people still care enough to invest that
yeah,
amount of time
for
into
sure.
finding out and supporting Ukraine. And so that I think is a really positive thing going forward.
Yes, I do think it's pretty impressive and quite magical that people care, because people tend to, and it makes sense, care about their own lives, And it's been a year and in some time, and the people still seem to care and do care, in fact, which is something I appreciate pretty much every day, and I think it's great. And I think this shows that there is, I guess, some goodness and care in the world, which
Yeah,
does help, lifts our spirits up for sure, and physically helps us, because we get
yeah,
like donations, aid, stuff like that, but we can afford to buy things for our soldiers that they would not have otherwise. So yeah, so it is very
brilliant,
very touching, and I always appreciate it. And yeah, be very much happy to chat again. And
cool beans.
yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And thanks to Mr. E30 at the end there. Really appreciate that, mate. Very, very kind of you. Love to Anastasia there. Thank you, sorry, Anastasiya. Goodness me, get it
Yeah,
right.
good job. Call me
Yeah,
Anna, it's
thanks.
easier for you. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so brilliant. So thank you to everyone. Really appreciate that, and thank you to my guest. Fantastic stuff, and we will speak again hopefully. But in the meantime,
Oh,
everyone,
hugs
uh,
from Portugal. I love Portugal. I wanted to go there so bad, but I never managed to. Yeah.
one day, you will be there. And Grand Cayman as well. So all around the world, you're getting a love there.
Mm,
But no, thanks to everyone. Check out what my guest is doing uh, on her Twitter.
Twitter, yeah.
Please go and check that out, and I'll share it on the screen now. And that has her Gmail account for PayPal. It'd be fantastic if you can help out her cause directly as well. But I will be certainly giving her the proceeds from today as well. So
Thank
look,
you.
really appreciate everyone. You take care. You look after yourself, Anastasiya, and hopefully we'll speak soon. Right.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.